Faith is a creed. Faith can be a weapon. For the faithful hunter, this creed is a belief in their way of life. This creed shapes their belief, how they view the supernatural world. Some of the creatures, some of the entities that they encounter might represent mortal sins. They might be victims, or they might be unholy hosts at odds with the world around them. For this kind of a hunter, faith comes in many forms. It could be the belief in a higher power, call it what you will, God, Allah, Buddha, Zeus, but you could also interpret this to other things. You could believe in your own personal abilities as a form of faith. You could believe in honoring your ancestors. That's the thing about faith, it's incredibly personal. Faithful hunters pride themselves on being able to turn away from temptation or bring someone into the fold, or even just offering a comforting word to someone that has experienced loss. They very easily fall into the stereotype of fire and brimstone zealot, Bible-thumping preacher on the street, and it's probably a stereotype that's not unjustly earned. It doesn't have to be as one-sided or one-dimensional as that. A faithful might be a monk who's finally coming out of the monastery to restore an imbalance. Something precious of theirs or their faith may have been tainted by a supernatural being, and now they are fighting to set it right. A common characteristic of the faithful is that they are relentless. They commonly see themselves as defenders, being a shield of faith rather than the sword. The world of darkness is full of horrors and terrible nasties. And those with the faithful creed, they want to go out and set it right. They are probably the most optimistic hunters you will run into. It's important to note that if you are playing a hunter of the faithful creed, you don't have to have the holier-than-thou attitude. Your hunter could be someone who goes into disaster zones. They could be an aid worker, a relief worker. They could be someone who is commonly quite charitable. They are someone who acts on the tenets of their faith. This also can apply to the world of business. Cutthroat CEOs, strong in their own conviction, can be a form of faith as well. The point I'm making is don't fall into the easy stereotype here. Now, some common problems with the faithful hunter are some that we've already discussed, but they also are deeply ingrained in religious organizations. This can cause problems for hunter cells in a couple of ways. One being that if an organization is involved, it's more about maintaining organizational structure than it is about purifying or clearing out the bad things. I mean, they will do that, but maintaining the structure, the organizational hierarchy is first priority. It can also turn into a bit of ostracification. Is that a word? It can also make some of the other hunters in your cell or those not part of your cell feel a bit ostracized because they're not being included in the organization. This could also arouse an unhealthy amount of suspicion, breeding and sowing distrust for those not in the faith being actively excluded. This would happen more so at the hands of the organizations, the organized religions that run hunter cells, less than the devout faithful themselves, although this could be an element of it as well. Another problem with the faithful hunter that they could run into is what's called a crisis of faith, something that they believe to be inherently true, eventually finding out that maybe that thing is not. Maybe they placed their faith in a person or some organization and it has let them down. This has potential to undermine the faithful hunter's entire belief system. Now, there are a few archetypes we can discuss around someone who has a faithful creed in their life. One would be the absolver. You could argue that this could also be referred to as the redeemer. For their point of view, ritual is everything. They go after those who may not necessarily realize they've been a victim, talking about angry ghosts, spirits that have lingered, that don't necessarily realize this is what's happened, and putting them at peace. Finding monsters that have committed atrocities, holding them accountable for their actions, and showing them the error of their ways, but not just showing them, making them understand it, internalize it, and accept it. The absolver will get more effective the more times they have performed this ritual, the more times they have done this. Because, practice makes perfect. Another one that follows the faithful creed, death's brings convert. You could also refer to this as the near-death experience. These people never had much use for religion. They didn't believe in any kind of higher power. And usually that's because they were off-put of religion from some zealot who tried to club them over the head with it. That was until one night, or one day maybe, when they felt the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. They didn't know how or why, but they were being pursued by something they couldn't explain, something terrifying. And in what was to be their final moments of life, they made a deal. They reached out to any sort of being that would be listening and promised that they would turn their lives around. They would devote themselves to a cause. These ones actually followed through with that. There are even those who devote themselves to ritual exercise. They are physical specimens of their faith. Oftentimes, they have devoted themselves to a community who is quite secluded. Sometimes, troubled youth are sent to these locations, or sometimes people just need to get away. However, all is not what it appears. For whatever reason, they encountered something that they cannot explain, but their mental ritual practice, their physical ritual practice enabled them to survive. There are other things for the faithful that are a little darker. The apostate, for example. They have seen many things. They've seen terrible things. They understand that there is a paradox when it comes to monsters. To be a good monster hunter, one must understand the monsters and maybe even be one themselves. I mean, vampires, they are strong, they can live forever. So why not indulge just a little bit? A little bit of vampire blood can help the apostate go a little bit further, stay a little bit stronger, perhaps even live long enough to see the eradication of all of the bloodsuckers. Now, the faithful are just one of 5 creeds in Hunter the Reckoning. If you'd like to know more about the other creeds, please click on the video on your screen now. Thank you to my patrons who support me and the channel. All of your support is greatly appreciated. My name's Nathaniel. Thanks for stopping by, everyone.